Well, that's where you started from, was drag and drive back in 07.
Before it was really even like a thing, though. Because there was only like, what, one of them?
Yeah, I did Drag Week in 07.
How many cars were in that?
It was maybe 100 cars.
And that was back when it was probably a lot more laid back.
Yeah, I think the fast cars were. Larry Larson's car wasn't. I think he still had a blower on his car.
It wasn't the truck at the time, right?
No,
it was the Nova.
It was pink at the time.
Yeah, it had a Roots blower on it.
And then Mike Roy, I guess Larry Larson. Do you know who Mike Roy is? He's got a big 70 Monte Carlo. It's burgundy.
Like a burgundy colored car.
I'd probably know it if I saw it.
He was heavy duty into Pro Charger when Pro Charger came out, so he took his car to Larry Larson's shop and they back halved it and made it a big tire car and basically was a big block Pro Charge setup. And he was running pretty good, but the car was heavy. It was another 4,200-pound car, and at the time, I don't think the transmission technology had gotten there yet with bigger components in the Turbo 400s, and they just kept breaking transmissions. But the early drag and drive stuff was a lot less hectic because we didn't have so many cars. The routes were way longer than they are now. There was one year that we ran 1,400 miles.
Oh wow!
And it was just miserably hot, and it was grueling.
Where was that one at? Was it?
We went from Memphis to Tulsa, back to Tulsa, I think.
Oh wow! Interesting. Interesting tracks.
Yeah.
I always think of them as like kind of like a Virginia almost.
Yeah.
Right
now they used to start like right in the Midwest. It was a lot of like you used to go to Topeka,
Kansas. Yeah.
Amarillo, Texas.
Yeah.
It was a lot of Midwest tracks.
Well, now there's so many drag and drives for people to get into that kind of pick your deal.
Pick your area and go to it.
Down here, I think we did like, what, 900 miles?
Yeah, eight and change.
Yeah, it wasn't crazy, but Florida's also pretty boring.
Yeah.
It's hard to make that route exciting.
Yeah, right. It's all flat and straight.
They kind of had to put us on the highway a little bit, which...
Well, when you do drag and drives and you've been through those big, long runs, we'd get our drive sheet. Oh, it's 270 miles. Oh, this is awesome. We used to do 400 in one stint, so it'd be like 270 was no problem. You know.
And how was that one set up? Was it like a drive day, race day? Like, because now we kind of...
It's the same format as it is now.
Yep. You just turn your ticket in, get loaded up, and go, and you'd have to be at the track the next morning. There was no extra drive day or anything like that.
Kind of just have to leave people behind if you can.
Yeah.
But I always laugh at the first timers because a couple of people they'd be like, oh, we'll ride together, we'll cruise together. I'm like, yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
if
it works out.
You kind of have to get to the next spot. If one of your friends is broken down, you want to help them, but you also have to get moving because you might be broken down in 100 miles if you don't.
The one year in 16 when we did it, the last year we did drag week with the RX-7. We were one of our buddies that we've known forever. He was riding, or he rides with Lutz for all of his drag and drives in the Mad Max and the when he used to have the other Chevy 2s. So we're like, oh, after the first day, we'll cruise with you guys. So it was us, Lutz, and
Lutz's son,
and a couple
Honda.
other guys.
Yeah.
And we get out there, and we don't have gear vendors in the car, and they've got giant tires, and we're on the 28. So we're cruising going like 60, and then Jeff passes by us probably doing 85 mile an hour in that Pro Mod just gear vendors just rolling. And then we're like, all right, see you guys. I guess we're not riding with you. 5 miles up the road, we see them pulled over, and there's freaking smoke coming out of the
They're
Pro
overheating. Or just going right by them.
I think they probably had because Jeff still has the record for fastest average. 6:19, I think, is his average.
Yeah.
In 16 he did it. So our buddy Scott was riding with them. I think that they didn't sleep at all.
Yeah.
The most they would sleep is 2 hours on the side of the road. They didn't go to the hotel.
He had a lot of oiling issues because he hurt the crank. They're putting bearings in it on the side of the road.
That was the year before. But this year was fuel pumps, and they would burn up fuel pumps, and then they would be driving they would have the generator running on the wheelie bars of the car, charged with the battery charger hooked up because they couldn't charge the car. Fuel pumps were failing, and then they pretty much would race and then just drive all the way through the night and go right to the track. Yeah. It was, I don't know how those guys did it. Like Jeff the one day at, where we at in Milan, Michigan? Was it Milan?
No, it was
US 131.
US 131, Martin, Michigan.
Michigan. we're sitting in the staging lanes getting ready to go, and he's just like sitting. He's got his full race suit on, sitting next to his Pro Mod, leaning up against his tire, just sleeping.
Yeah.
That's what's fun about those events, because no matter how much money somebody has into their car, we're all in the same boat.
yeah.
Like, nobody's in their stacker.
No, it's
toter
attrition.
home. Like,
Yeah.
we're all in the same. Like, no matter what car you got, you could be in a stock Crown Vic. You're struggling pretty much just the same as like the guy in his Pro Mod.
Yeah.
Which is cool. That's why there's that camaraderie. Of like, you could be cruising down the highway and your car's broken, and people you don't know will stop and help you.
Big time.
And everybody that I would say the majority of people that do drag and drives, they'll do some crazy stuff to get their cars going back again. Like in 16, we hurt a lifter in it when we made it to the checkpoint. We heard a lifter chirping, so we took it apart. We're like, okay, took out a lifter. Like, well, we can shove a lifter in and keep going, but we still had 3 more race days, or the cam's probably eating on that load.
And that was the first time I brought a spare cam. I had a used one sitting there. I said, I'll bring this camshaft. You never know.
That's a wild thing to pack.
So, and then so we're like, okay, let's just take it apart. So a bunch of guys were hanging out. That was, remember all the Swedish guys that there was probably like 10 guys in one RV, like these Swedish guys that were hanging out with us, and they were just grilling in the parking lot, because at least we were at a parking lot with lights changing the cam. So and then at 2
think about this, changing a camshaft.
I was going to say.
On the side of the road.
And that's what you're appreciative of, that there was street lights.
Yeah.
Yes.
And pavement and asphalt.
So then,
Nice that we weren't in the woods.
And then, so we started at 8 p.m., finished at 8 a.m. the next morning, and we were still 150 miles from the track. But at like 3 in the morning, Jeff Lutz and Scott roll in with the Pro Mod, and he rolls into the parking lot, and they get out of this thing, and they're just filthy because they've just been working on that thing the whole time. And then they lay down and sleep on the side of the road, like next to us, and we're working on the car for like 3 hours.
Well, first of all, they've got gas, fuel, and they were just high on all the fumes.
Oh my God.
So they get out. Jeff gets out of the car. He goes, "What are you guys doing?" I go, "We're putting a camshaft." That's badass. And then he just falls down and goes to sleep. He was done.
The other thing is, I have this rule of I don't want to ever say I'm ready for a drag and drive. Like when people are like, "Oh, are you ready?" I'm like, I don't know, because if you say that, you're gonna play yourself, and you're gonna be at the second track, and your car's gonna be blown up or something's like wrong. You just have to go into it not ready, and you just hope you get through it type of thing. And also, like if you get to a hotel, you like, oh, I got all this time. Then you wake up the next morning to get to the track. That's when the failure is going to happen. Overnight, when the car's not touched, is when like the failure is going to happen. When you think you got time, and like you kind of think there's like a calm to it.
Oh yeah.
Is when the things are really going to hit the fan. So you almost have to get to the track as soon as you can.
Yes.
And as early as possible, because if I dilly-dally, I know that's when I'm going to be out of time.
So that's like sick week when we did it, what was that, 22, the first sick week?
First one, yeah.
The last route was from South Georgia all the way back to Bradenton, and that's when they stopped at Garlett's. And most guys stayed in Ocala, and then they drove to Bradenton the next morning, because then we raced in the evening. And we're like, well, why don't we just go all the way down to Bradenton, so if we have an issue, we're already there, and you have time to fix the car, versus, you stop in Ocala, you go to bed, you wake up to drive, and you're like, oh, something's messed up, you got to work on it.
And that's what we did. My buddy Scott was co-piloting it with me, and so we got a run in at South Georgia, and we left at 3 in the afternoon. Got to Garlett's, did the checkpoint, and then we just carried on. We got to the hotel at midnight in Bradenton. So 3 to midnight. We went the whole route, and then
That was a tough route, too. That was really dark.
Yeah.
Like
Dark and
pitch
long.
black.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what it is, but all these cars have bad headlights.
Yes.
It's just like a guarantee. Even if you have an OEM headlight, they're not good.
They're not good, exactly. So we ended up getting to the hotel. We parked underneath the entranceway. And I went inside and I asked the girl, I said, hey, we've got to do a little work on the car. I said, oh, yeah, no problem. Well, I said, we got to pull the intake off and check the lifters. I said, I have an idea.
Tell the check-in lady this? She's like, okay.
Okay. Well, she comes out and she goes, oh, my God. I go, we will clean everything up. We won't leave anything. Like, there was parts everywhere. But we ended up pulling the intake and checking the lifter. Sure enough, I had one just starting to get rough. So I said, okay, that was perfect. I said I wanted to try to lay down a good pass at Bradenton, the last track, and we were done by 5 a.m. and then we took about 2 hours of sleep and then went to the track. So it was just like those drag and drives will wear you down.
It's hard. I mean, it gets dangerous too. You start to worry, like, oh, I'm pretty wore out. I'm pretty run down right now, but we're also stubborn. That one's just like...
Here's a good second part of that story of after we finished the cam. So Jeff Lutz and Scott, they left before we were done. We get our car all patched up. We're on the road. It's like 9 a.m, and Scott calls me. He's like, hey, where are you guys at? And we're like, oh, we're still like 80 miles from the track. He's like, I just saw you drive by us. The wheel flew off the Pro Mod.
Yeah.
And we're like, what do you mean the wheel flew off the Pro Mod? They're driving down the road, and the front wheel goes flying off into the ditch, and
they're on the strut.
And they're on the strut.
And he's got carbon brakes. He's got all this crazy stuff on the car.
So we're like,
he's hard on stuff.
Yeah.
So we're like, how are you gonna find a carbon brake, spindle mount setup? And was it who was it Goldstone that knew a buddy up there? That Brian Goldstone.
Yeah.
He had a buddy there that had parts, and they
bolted it all on.
And they just
that stuff is relatively universal, except for the brakes and things.
Yeah.
Can you imagine being in a Pro Mod driving down the street going 80 miles an hour and the front wheel just flies off?
Yeah, I mean, the spindle mount stuff's scary to drive that much on the street. I've always wondered about that.
Well, they have two versions now. They have an Anglia, which is the small bearings. They don't recommend it on a heavy car. Mm-hmm. And what they've done on the new Strange stuff is they've put a larger spindle, like a Camaro. It's basically like a Chevy Camaro. So it handles a larger bearing.
I think I was hearing one story. What's the black Mustang with the big blower? Roy something or Vince? I can't think of it.
The 65 or 66?
Yeah.
I know.
The tire car.
Yep.
And they broke converter to rear end one time. And I was like, oh, that's like an end of your week.
Done.
And they're like, we found somebody with all of the same stuff. I was like, how does that even work?
That's insane.
Just like the luck of finding somebody local with things. That's why Florida's nice, because there's a lot of racers in this area, but then you're somewhere like in the Rocky Mountains and you're like, well, there's not that much around here.
Well, the one year you were fixing everybody's transmission at drag week.
Well, I basically gave myself an education on transmissions, because I was having them built professionally and they'd fail, and it was always my fault. So I was like, I'm spending all this money. I can't believe it's that difficult. So I started stripping them down, looking at them, trying to identify all the problems, and I just kind of, you get really good at doing stuff once you've done it so many times. And
Turbo 400s aren't crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, they're complicated, but once,
I started with Power Glides, and they are super simple.
Yeah.
And then we switched over to a 400. But so that year there was guys with multiple transmission issues, so we just kind of helped out.
Building them in the parking lots.
Yeah, changing out shafts and drums. And just
do you think it becomes just a cruising temperature issue a lot of the time?
No, it's inferior parts. Like a lot of when you strip a transmission down that's supposedly going to handle X amount of horsepower, you open it up and it's got a stock shaft here, it's got a stock drum. They're not designed to handle that kind of abuse, especially in a heavyweight car. So it all comes down to part failure, because they're not adequate parts.
What was the most common failure in those transmissions, you think, other than the Sprag, like in the 400?
If you use a stock input shaft, they'll handle about 1,000 horsepower. And then
you need to
after
go to
that,
a big shaft, or at least
even a good 300M will work. But ultimately now they've got larger shafts. So
I was watching this weekend at Snowbirds. Mark Mickey was just churning those things out. People were coming at him with more broken parts than I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
And he was quick. They're prepared to fully rebuild those things, 10 cases of lap fluid ready to sell.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we like I said, we've maintained all of our own transmissions, and then I got to a point where we were going to try to change gear ratios, and with a 400, you're limited in the case, so I would have to buy an aftermarket case and all that. So I actually use Cone products.
Yeah.
And I priced out all the parts versus having them build one, and I had them build one just because it was
cheaper to have them build.
Yeah, it was actually a little less money. So he gave us a little break on it. So we got a Pro Mod style transmission, and it's got a larger main shaft, and it's got the inch 250 input shaft.
So it's like a Bruno Lenko input shaft.
It's like it handles 4,000, like the 4,000 horsepower deal.
Yeah.
So. And, they're like, you don't need all that. I said, I understand that, but it's in a 3,500-pound car. It's not in a 2,000-pound Pro Mod. So
yeah, it's nice to be a little
overkill. Exactly.
And if you can,
swing
a couple nicer parts, you might as well, because once you break something and it tears up something else, then all of a sudden you're like, well, you just sprung for the better stuff.
But we've the transmission before, stock case, stock gear set.